Counselor Abdallah Rothman in New York University, Abu Dhabi, has got a doctoral candidate in psychology, Master of Arts of Psychology, certification in art therapy, Bachelor of Arts in Community Studies, licensed professional counselor, and he is a professional membership in American Counseling Association. We invite you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you, Rasjid, Dr. Skinner, and I'm honored to be here with Professor Malik Badri. And I think, like I said last time I was here, I hope you all realize how lucky you are to have him here. Professor Badri is really, we owe so much to him in terms of establishing this growing field in Islamic psychology, and now finally seeing the fruition of his life's work. So, alhamdulillah, we're very grateful to him and honored to be working with him. And so, like Dr. Skinner said, oftentimes we get asked, is there an Islamic psychology? Is Islamic psychology possible? Is it something that we need to start working on? And really, this is something that has been in the works for at least 40 years, and we could say even longer than that. And now, really what's happening now is that it's a collective sort of conscious awareness that it's now time for this approach to come into the mainstream and for it to be accessible to more people. And when I say more people, I mean definitely more of the Muslim community to benefit from, but I think it has a broader reach than that. I think that there's actually a time for Islamic psychology to offer something to the modern world, and specifically to modern psychology. Just to sort of add, I guess, or say it in different words of what Dr. Skinner said, the thing that makes Islamic psychology unique, why oftentimes people say, well, why do we need an Islamic psychology? What's wrong with Western psychology? Why can't we just sort of adapt the language to fit with Islamic terminology that makes sense to Muslims? And I would say that the thing that is unique about an Islamic paradigm, there's many things, and it's a whole detailed science of how to work with the person. But at the core, I would say that the unique thing about an Islamic paradigm is that we're looking at the person in their full trajectory of who they are, not just from birth to death. So oftentimes we think of, when we talk about the self, what people are thinking about that, and this is not necessarily just a Western versus Islamic dichotomy. Yes, Western psychology tends to define the person based on the thoughts, based on our memories, based on the life that we remember and have constructed from the time we're born up until the present and what we project into the future of this life. But in Islamic perspective, an Islamic paradigm is seeing that the person has a much longer trajectory. That's before coming into this dunya, this temporal world, and beyond this. And I think that's a difficult thing for people to grasp because it seems so abstract. But at the core of an Islamic worldview, this is really primary and central to how we motivate and how we move through our lives. Because if we have an idea of akhirah, of an afterlife, then it changes how we're living our lives, and ultimately it has a specific impact and effect on what we're even doing in something like psychotherapy. What are the treatment goals? If we conceive of ourselves from our thoughts and our lives in this world, then oftentimes the treatment goal is becoming more comfortable with our lives in this world. And in an Islamic paradigm, that is only part of the focus. It's perfectly fine to be focused on trying to make life better and to be more comfortable and to get to a place of being happy. This is a good thing. But at the underlying core of how that's going to happen and for what purpose, why do you want to be comfortable, and what does that mean, this fundamentally changes from an Islamic worldview. And so, like I said, it's not necessarily a Western versus Islamic paradigm, dichotomy. Even Muslims, we, just by the nature of being a human being in this world, and the nature of having nafs, this part of ourselves that is sort of oriented towards the temporal world and oriented towards what we want and what we feel comfortable with, we tend to identify with our thoughts and our construction of ourself. And Professor Badri has made this distinction in the past of that the self, the concept of self, is something that was created by people who do not believe in a soul, or maybe even have an unbelieving soul. They're not in connection with this deeper aspect of the person in a holistic view. And so there's this construct of who we are that's based on our mental concept. And so this is a major thing that's missing from a Western paradigm, is treating the soul versus treating the constructed self. So what we're seeing now is that this is a natural, Dr. Skinner talked about fitra. There's this sense that all human beings have this innate awareness of our natural state, and which involves and includes our soul. And you see this in modern psychology, whereas it used to be so much focus on behaviorism and this sort of materialist perspective of the human being that just had no room for the soul. It just didn't even come into play in the conception of what we're working with in psychology. But now, the movement of modern psychology is really, I would say, like catching up with the past. So what I mean by that is we have in Islam a long-standing tradition of not only understanding the soul, but learning how to and understanding how to work with that for the process of human development. And now, in modern psychology, there's all these movements of incorporating spirituality into psychology, because people are coming to this awareness that this is really where change happens, and this is really what is at the core of what people are wanting and looking for in wanting change in life. And so people are starting to incorporate things like an understanding of the soul, an understanding of connection to being in the heart of the person, as Dr. Skinner mentioned, of this spiritual center in the heart. This is happening now. And I think what Islam stands to offer to this movement in modern psychology is that, whereas I think what often happens is people are starting to piece together a patchwork of different aspects to build this more spiritual psychotherapy. So they're taking from this tradition, they're taking from this tradition, and they're trying to sort of also using an intuitive sense of what works and building this way of working with people. This is great, it's a good development, but there's a potential danger in this, and there's also it's almost like there already exists something within our tradition that has a full picture of understanding this, that's grounded in Islam and it's grounded in traditional wisdom. And so, what I think Islam stands to offer the world is that we have in our tradition an extremely intricate science of the soul. And it's something that is known by many of our scholars, but it's something that has been lost by many by the majority of people who orient themselves towards Islam in a way that is sort of focused on the behaviors and aligning with practicing the religion. Without this understanding of underneath those practices is a fabric and a foundation that is essentially a psychology, a way of understanding the developmental process of the human soul, and how to work through this life on working on our soul. And the soul has an anatomy that has been mapped out by our scholars and by this tradition of wisdom. And so we have an understanding of when I say an anatomy of the soul, we have without going into detail, Dr. Skinner referenced it, and this can go, this can be, as he said, a 3-year course on understanding this. This is how detailed the science is. But at the core of it is this understanding of how the soul is structured and what elements are in it, with the nafs and the qalb and the ruh, and how they interact to inform diagnosis and treatment. And so we take this knowledge, and what we're doing is we're adapting the treatment. The treatment is there in Islam and in our Islamic tradition, but what has happened is there was never a concept of psychology, of this field of study that gives rise to something like psychotherapy, where people are looking to address life's problems by going to having a therapeutic encounter, the relationship with a therapist. This is something that is a modern development, but it's something that is very useful and works really well within our modern lives, that we can adapt this traditional wisdom to make it more accessible to people. And so we're not necessarily recreating the wheel. We're not coming up with new concepts. We're not creating a new conception of the human being. This is something that is within our tradition, but it's spread out in different forms of knowledge that previously has been secluded to people who have studied these realms of knowledge. And now, I think what this movement of Islamic psychology is translating that knowledge and that wisdom of the soul into a practical application where people can access it and apply it to their daily lives, so that it no longer becomes this sort of esoteric, theological, philosophical discourse, but it becomes a practical way of meeting the needs of people's daily struggles in life. And this is often what is missing. There's people who, have a deep connection to Islam, love Islam, have learned from a study of the religion. We have a basic understanding. But then there's a disconnect sometimes with how does that knowledge and how does that practice affect our state of our heart, and our state of how dealing with problems that come up in life, whether we're not talking just about what we often refer to as mental health illness. It's also just the regular struggles that we come up against in our life. And really, this distinction between mental health, it's really just a matter of degree. When people come in with a mental illness, or they have a problem that's getting in the way of their daily functioning, it becomes a presenting problem. But ultimately, everybody has we have an illness in our heart just by nature of the fact that we are living in the dunya in separation from Allah. And so much of what our remedies are is understanding the specific dynamics of how we bring ourselves into alignment with fitrah and access these remedies of the heart. And it's putting it in a way that makes it accessible to human beings. So, and when I say human beings, this is where I think the potential is not just for Muslims. So yes, it makes, it's much easier. So I practice Islamic psychology. I consider it my theoretical orientation to psychotherapy. And I make a distinction between Muslim mental health, which is working primarily with Muslims, dealing with whatever they're dealing with based on their, and using terminology that makes sense to Muslims. But what I mean by a theoretical orientation of Islamic psychology, it's a way of understanding the human being and using this anatomy of the soul to inform treatment. And this doesn't necessarily have to be just a benefit for Muslims. It is something that can offer a great deal of wisdom and knowledge of an approach to psychotherapy to modern psychology. And I think this is something that we are beginning to establish more firmly, this Islamic psychology orientation and approach. And oftentimes this means it's mostly accessible to the Muslim community. But I think once we establish this as an approach, I see a time when there could be, when you, as psychology students, you know, you go and you look in your library and you have access to these different theoretical orientations, and there are different, you know, books on the shelf. So there may be a time when we can access people can look to an Islamic psychology theoretical orientation to see what it has to offer our understanding of the human being. Just like modern psychology has benefited from Buddhism, so we hear a lot about mindfulness and this being influenced from the Buddhist tradition. And this has now become sort of a secularized version of it that is enhancing psychotherapy. People are using it. So I see that there's room for the modern Western psychology to benefit from Islam in the same way by offering things like, maybe it's called something like heartfulness rather than mindfulness, having a different orientation to understanding that the spiritual center of the human being is in the heart. And along with that, like I said, all of the other things that come with it, and the intricacies of understanding the anatomy of the soul and how that informs treatment, and that it can be a transformative way of working with the human being. Rather than just coping with difficulties in life, it can help people actually completely transform and find healing through this way of working. So this is the work that we are working on, and it's something that's developing, and we're excited to have young people and young students like yourselves to be joining this effort and to be starting to think from the beginning of, while you're learning these things about Western psychology, also being able to see that there's an Islamic psychology from your own tradition that we can that can inform your own practice, and also you can be a part of bringing this to the rest of the world, inshallah. Thank you so much.